I would be very happy and very relieved to feel as though I was responding to the elected government of the United States of America with what talents God's given me. I'm responsible to the people of the United States of America. The nature of the information to which I'm privy is sensitive enough that the full disclosure of that information would have to be done in an appropriate location and under appropriate circumstances. Certain military application information would have to be done in a closed session milieu for the national security. The Congress knows it's not in control. They know that this is a wild train out of control. And they want that control back. They're not stupid. They know that there are things that are going on down the hall from them that they can't fathom. They deserve to have that back in their hands because that's what they were elected to do. And if we care at all about what's left of our Constitution, they deserve to have that in their hands. Aren't we the masters of our destiny in our country? Aren't we supposed to be? Yes, sir. Supposed to be.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
In this particular interview, Dan reveals for the first time ever the inner layout of Area 51 and S4. He reveals where the 9 captured UFOs are stored. He tells about the clean sphere, where the captured extraterrestrial visitor was housed and vigorously interrogated for over 50 years. Much valuable information was extracted from the JRod person before he was allowed to return to his home world in 2003. He became Dan's friend, and Dan carries his imprint in his mind and consciousness to this day. This interview took place at a secret location in Las Vegas, November 29th, 2005. In this series, you will learn information never before made public. Astonishing, amazing, earth-shaking, yes, but it's simply the truth. Mark McCandlish, one of the premier presenters at Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project, May 9th, 2001, at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., was chosen by Stargate Productions as the initial interviewer of Dan Burisch because of his technical artistic skills to depict the interior of S4, the most secret part of the most secret base in the world, Groom Lake.
During the course of my career, I've twice had a secret security clearance. In 1967, while my father was stationed at Westover Air Force Base, the headquarters for 8th Air Force Strategic Air Command, I witnessed and watched through a telescope a UFO which hovered over a nuclear weapons storage facility for approximately 10 minutes and then departed with an acceleration approaching a bullet leaving a rifle barrel. In 1988, in November, a college buddy of mine, an associate by the name of Brad Sorensen, informed me that he had personally witnessed 3 flying saucers at a very large hangar at Norton Air Force Base during the course of an air show that was held on Saturday, November 12, 1988. I subsequently called my congressman from that district. I called his office. This was Congressman George E. Brown Jr., who at the time was the chairman of the Congressional Committee on Space Science and Advanced Technology. I naturally assumed that since this presentation that Brad talked about was for top military brass and certain congressional individuals, that his office must have coordinated this with the local Air Force Office of Public Affairs. A male staff member in Congressman Brown's office not only confirmed the exhibit, but the fact that there were 3 discs at that exhibit. These discs were hovering off the floor without any visible means of support. They were referred to as alien reproduction vehicles, also nicknamed the flux liner because they used high voltage electricity. Let's see. To keep things short, this is a diagram that I made based on a sketch that Brad Sorensen did for me in rough form shortly after he had his sighting, and subsequently cleaned that drawing up and made it much more accurate. And that's the drawing that Dr. Greer is holding there now. Anyway, I could provide you much more detail at a later time, and I am prepared to testify in detail concerning these events and their truthfulness before Congress. Thank you very much.
Stargate Productions has briefed John Lear extensively on the Dan Burisch story in 2005 and 2006. Here he describes Area 51.
This is a Nevada test site. The area comprises about 10,000 square miles. It's bordered on the south by Mercury, and on the west side by Highway 95, and up here on the northwest by Tonopah, and across the top to Crystal Springs, and down here to Las Vegas. Right dead center of the test site is what is known as Area 51. Also known as Watertown, also known as the Ranch. At the very center is Groom Lake. It's about 10 miles on each side, and this is where most of the secret activity goes on. Just 10 miles south of the Groom Lake complex is an even more secret area. This is where the saucers, the discs, are flown, an area called S4. Area 51 was basically a Navy training base until 1955, when, in conjunction with the CIA, Lockheed made a secret test base out of it. And the reason was to test the U-2. In 1959, 60, and 61, they also tested the SR-71 out of there, and it became a perfect area in which to test secret equipment and secret airplanes. It was because it was so remote, it was bounded on all sides by mountains, and it was essentially a million miles from nowhere.
Bob Lazar had told you about the lounge. What were you telling me about the lounge there?
Oh, well, there's a Air Force colonel that's been there since the beginning of Groom Lake Area 51, and his name is Sam. His last name begins with H. I don't know what his last name is. But anyway, Sam meets every single person that ever works at or goes into or has anything to do with Groom Lake. So he's been there forever. He knows everybody. If you get a clearance and go to work up there, the first one you meet is Sam. And so he's such a fixture up at Groom Lake that the bar and lounge up there is named Sam's Place. And
he's an actual person?
He's an actual person, no, Air Force colonel, and he's probably CIA because nobody's just Air Force up there.
Right.
The interesting thing here, as I was telling you, Ron, is that so many people have said that Bob Lazar didn't work there because he wasn't weighed going in and going out. And that was an important part of the Bob Lazar story, is he never mentioned being weighed going in and going out, because he was not. But remember, this was in 1988. Burisch is talking about 1989 and beyond, and most people are familiar with the information beyond that. Let me tell you exactly why people are being weighed. It's because during the time that Bob was up at the working up at S4, he took a camera in there. It was a small 110 camera. He bought it at just a pharmacy. He put it in his pocket, and when he was working up at S4 on one of the chairs, he said he leaned back and he put the camera into the leg of that chair like this.
He leaned back and because the camera just fit right up into the leg. And what he was going to do was take pictures, keep it there, and at some point take it out. Because at that time there was no weighing of personnel. So then after he left, the question between Bob and me and Goofon and the rest was, I wonder if they ever found the camera. Well, let me tell you, they did find the camera, and that's why everybody gets weighed going in and out, so just that thing won't happen again.
The organization that is in charge of handling the extraterrestrial presence on Earth and keeping the knowledge classified since at least 1947 is called Majestic. The origins of the Majestic 12, as it is called, have their roots in the July 1947 crash of several ET vehicles in and around Roswell, New Mexico. President Truman established the Majestic 12 Committee, and they were formally inaugurated in September 1947. The original members are as follows.
The Majestic 12 is a group of scientists and scientific advisors who work for the Committee of the Majority. Now, I have had occasion, when I was involved with Aquarius, to have to send to the so-called Majestic 12 the documents to which you were privy, the leaked material from my deceased friends. And I had association with them on that level. One of the Majestic 12, or I should say was alleged to be a member of the Majestic 12, was present at the Clean Sphere when I was in the Clean Sphere. I've mentioned his name before. This again may be risking the cause of my freedom because of the very problems we face now as a society. So I've got to be careful about that, whether or not that sacrifices my freedom. His first name is Vignew. As far as I will go from there.
At a secret location in Las Vegas, Mark McCandlish continues his in-depth interview of Dan Burisch, a government-sanctioned whistleblower extraordinaire, about the alien cover-up at the most secret base, Area 51, called S4, at the Nevada test site.
I was then taken for the first time to Groom Lake for testing, and this was bizarre. I was originally taken, the first flight was in fact out of the Janet terminal. I was taken to the Hughes Executive Air Terminal.
This is McCarran Airport in Vegas?
Yes. We were picked up. I was told by Sam that I would receive a series of tone codes and they would give me a name. Well, and a time. I'd be picked up outside and my mom and my dad would regularly see me. In fact, as this was going on, get picked up outside the apartment on Channel 10 Drive, saluted by U.S. Air Force, they had stripes and they were in a normal
enlisted men.
Right, and placed in the back of a small sedan, black sedan, and would be transported over to the Hughes Executive Terminal. I was then escorted in to a gentleman at a podium. From there, I was given a license plate number. I had to show my ID and all of that business. I had my ID with me.
Were these like randomly chosen, but actual license plate numbers?
That I don't know.
Okay.
That I don't know. But they read with the 3 letters, 3 numbers, like a standard Nevada license plate.
In 2004, Ron Garner, Stargate producer, introduced Linda Howe, UFO researcher, to Doreen Crane, Dan's mother, in Las Vegas. Linda continued her investigation into the Dan Burisch story. Pictured here is Linda with Dan at Frenchman's Mountain outside of Las Vegas. The following interview took place on the Coast to Coast radio program on February the 10th, 2006, with George Norrie, Linda Howe, and Doreen Crane. Doreen confirms her son's story about being given a secret code, being picked up at their home, and seeing him board a Janet jet at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas.
Linda, let's talk a little bit now, if you can. First of all, before we go to Dodie, tell us about Dan Burisch. There are a lot of new people that come to Coast, and they're saying, who is this person? So I'll let you explain that.
Well, I was hoping I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone and actually start with his mother and come up chronologically so that we can see a kind of flow here.
All right.
Dodie Crane, as she's known to people, was born Doreen LaPierre Crane on July 28, 1939, which makes her 66 years old today. She married her husband, John Crane, 44 years ago on December 31st, 1961, and 3 years later, Danny B. Crane was born on February 2nd at St. Francis Hospital in Linwood, California. 22 years later, on December 24th, 1986, Danny B. Crane received a BA from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, after spending a youth with great intense focus on microbiology. That I have established myself in talking with people and mentors who knew him during his young years and in high school. Then in 1988 to 1989, according to Doreen Crane, her son Danny, quote, received money from the United States Navy for work to get his PhD in microbiology at State University of New York, Stony Brook, unquote. Dodie Crane said the PhD diploma certificate arrived in the mail at the John and Doreen Crane home in Las Vegas on February 5th, 1990. John Crane says he put it in a frame and he nailed it to the living room wall. And now as we speak, in 2006 February, Dan Burisch is now 42 years old, and he has not seen either of his parents since October 5th, 1993. Dan Burisch told me a year or so ago that he did work on a top-secret MJ-12 project for the United States Navy that took him into, specifically, Area 51 S4 between 1989 and 1994. He says that's the only relevant time of his story. While he was there, he allegedly worked in a clean sphere with an EBEN, one of these extraterrestrial biological entities, on a medical project. I think it was on Coast a year ago. Amid the increasing amount of smoke and confusion around the Dan Burisch story, I told you that as much smoke as there was, I still thought that there was some fire there, and I still do based on some of my own independent research, but it is without doubt one of the most controversial sagas in the whole history of the UFO phenomenon, and nothing really has been proved. And I wondered, George, if we could start out by introducing Doreen Crane and asking her what she thinks is the strongest evidence as his mother that she knows personally that convinces her that Dan worked for at least a period of time for the United States government.
Sure thing. Doreen's with us now. Hi, Doreen.
Hi. You can call me Dodie.
Okay, Dodie. I'm going to let you and Linda chat for a while because she is indeed a better expert than I ever will be in this particular case, and I will just muddy it up. So go ahead, Linda.
Okay. Hi, Dodie.
Hi. How you doing?
What has convinced you, as his mother, from being around him before he left your house and never returned? What specifically, the phone codes, the cars, tell this audience about what you know personally.
Okay, first of all, I forgot to mention to you when I was talking to you about a W-2 form from the U.S. Naval Intelligence that John used to make Danny's taxes. And we had a W-2 form, but of course they were attached to Danny's copies and stuff, and he took those with him when he left home.
But you're saying your husband personally saw a W-2 Navy form because he did your son's taxes?
Yes, and I seen it too, because I used to sit around with John when we did the taxes.
Okay. Now, talk about the phone.
Okay, the phone calls. When Danny was living at home, he got picked up with the Navy, got involved with the U.S. Naval Intelligence at UNLV. Then he came home one day and told us that he had signed a piece of paper that he was going to be helping the Naval Intelligence at Area 51. And he was 18 years old. We almost blew our stack because he had signed the paper. Secondly, after that, phone calls kept coming into our home, and they'd ask for Danny, and I would give them to Danny, and Danny would punch in a code, and then either he would call back or they would, at that time, tell him where to go. either at Nellis or at McCarran.
What is your firsthand knowledge about either helping him, driving him, or checking on cars? How do you know that he ever went to McCarran or Nellis?
Well, first of all, 18, 19 years old, you kind of wonder what's going on. So couple of times I followed him when he had his own car. I was a little leery, like everybody else. You never know. But it was true. He was going to Nellis. His dad drove him to Nellis also, and he was going to McCarran. And one day he told me that if I would go by Hughes Airport near McCarran, that I would see him get on the Janus airline. And I did. I seen him get on.
And the Janus airplane is supposed to be the small one to fly scientists out to Area 51S4.
Correct. He told me, he said, Mom, if you want to see this, come on over and see it. And I drove by and I waited a few minutes and I watched him get on the plane. And it was my son getting on the plane.
Dodie, would you say it is fair on this February 10th, 2006 night to say that neither you nor your husband nor anyone right now has anything that would stand up as solid proof that Dan B. Crane Burisch worked with an extraterrestrial biological entity in a sphere at Area 51S4?
Well, let me put it this way. I brought up my son not to lie, and he told his dad and I a couple of times that he had done just that. And I believed him because I believed what I seen with my own eyes and how he was being picked up. He got picked up the U.S. Naval and right in front of our home, and I believe him.
From there, I would take that. I was escorted out onto the tarmac, up an external ramp,
A rolling
staircase, into the Janet flight. And I could see that it was a white. Yeah, there was a 737 Boeing. They had no markings on them except for I remember seeing some number details as I walked by the cockpit one time. Some number details to the bottom right of the co-pilot. Okay. The right side would be the co-pilot. Co-pilot's. Yes. And aside from that, a red stripe, and there was nothing up on the tail that I noticed, the stabilizer fin.
What was the inside of the aircraft like?
The ones that I were in, it was a slate gray, and they had paps over the seats that had stripes on them.
Any baggage or bins above?
There were baggage bins, but I never saw them accessed. Okay. And so I would be brought into the aircraft and taken back to the tail of the plane. And then I could see and I could hear other folks loading in up front, and a drape would be pulled. And I was told ultimately by one of the male enlisted personnel who were actually, there was a U.S. Air Force actually on board this aircraft, that those were engineers for Groom Lake, and you're here, they're there, and never the twain shall meet. And this was especially during the first time. Things relaxed a little bit as time went on, when I was meeting with other team members and we would go from there or go from McCarran. But it didn't, it never totally relaxed. There was always that wall between we and they. From there, we got close a couple times, sitting behind the other engineers, but sure. Just close. We wanted to hear.
Or curiosity, natural curiosity. Yeah.
They didn't have the same curiosity about us. I don't even know if they knew that we were there, but that we were just disinterested or not interesting to them. But the aircraft taxied, took off. Not that many minutes later, a few minutes. That's what it seemed like. The captain would normally turn on the PA system in the flights, where we could hear him actually communicating with ground control, and there was no music playing at the time when the PA would come on. That would automatically cut off. And later on, I had mentioned that Neil Diamond's "Coming to America." I love the song. Neil, I love you, but over and over and over again. It gets kind of...
Like a closed loop?
Mm-hmm.
Did you play the whole song, or was it just the phrase, "Coming to America"?
It was the whole song.
Okay. Well, at least that's some...
That helped. No, it was the whole song. Oh, God, over and over again. Anyway, that would be bad. But I would hear them call pyramid, pyramid, pyramid.
That was your call sign?
That was something that I think the pilot may have been communicating with Groom Ground Control.
Okay.
Confirming that whatever, I think maybe I'm guessing here, whatever the identifier was from their ground control for the aircraft, whatever tag they had or whatever on their
So he was
radar.
addressing the GCI?
I believe so.
Okay, so he
I
would
believe
say
so.
pyramid, pyramid,
Pyramid, pyramid, pyramid, and then we would do this sort of a bank. It was a heavy left bank, and then we would descend into the Groom complex, taxi off to the right-hand side, then there was a left turn, and then we would move over to the right. So it was land, right, left, and a move over to the right.
So were you coming in from the north, or were you able to discern?
Oh, I don't know.
Because if you
to be honest with you, I don't know.
Being somewhat familiar with the layout of Groom Lake, the main runway runs north and south.
Yes.
Almost.
Yeah, it would have had to have been from that way. So when we were making the left-hand bank, we were making a
sweeping 180-degree turn.
A sweeping 180 turn to go from north to south.
Okay.
That would make sense.
So that would mean then that you were probably flying along the eastern margin of the Nellis test range, and then came around from the northeast, and then banked in.
That would make sense.
And made a landing from the north into the airport.
That would make sense from the banking that we did.
But of course, on the other side of that, the long dirt road that leads from the mailbox up there off of the so-called extraterrestrial highway, that would have taken the Janet flight right over that area to come in on its final approach, wouldn't it? And I don't think I've
never seen the mailbox.
Yeah, well, I've only been up there once myself, but
I've heard about it.
It just seems to me that a lot of the early debunkers were saying that some of the things that people had seen and that they thought were UFOs were actually just the landing lights for the Janet flights making their approach.
Well, it's possible, and there was jokes going on at the time. This was after Bob Lazar's outing, when everybody got very tense, very paranoid up there, and there was a definite reaction. So I can tell that Bob's story, this may be a little bit of verification for him. I can tell that his story by evidence is accurate because of the accuracy of the Galileo Bay at S4.
But the Galileo Bay was which? Was that where the aircraft, the extraterrestrial?
The 4-1, the extraterrestrial and the ARVs.
Okay.
And whatever they had under the tarpaulin that I couldn't see, for sure. But the thing is not only did he have that accurate, which he could have heard from someone, but they wouldn't, in my estimation, have become as paranoid as what they did about badges, identifying, as stiff as what they were acting. And I was hearing that they were acting stiffer than usual.
From
if this guy hadn't been there, right, if this guy hadn't been there. So that provides a degree of verification to me personally that he had been there.
In Bob Lazar's video, Excerpts from the Government Bible, he describes his badge in great detail that allowed him to enter S4 at Area 51.
As you can see in this representation, my ID badge had a white background with one light blue and one dark blue diagonal stripe in the upper left-hand corner. At the bottom of the badge, there were letters and numbers designating various areas, including S4. On my badge, there was a star punch through S4. The back of the ID badge was dark blue with a vertical mag stripe running down one side.
My relationship with Groom Lake was very small. I was taken a couple times after landing off the Janet flights, handing my license plate number. and was taken in a small buggy, almost like a small Jeep, golf cart type.
Was it open or was it closed?
It was open.
Okay.
It was open. And by a couple, a very large looking hangar, the thing looked like a mountain as we passed by the right hand side of it. And a couple buildings into the left, was taken inside of a building, was identified by security again,
Okay.
Nellis Security. They looked like, they were in cami and they looked like standard enlisted security officers for Air Force.
Okay, you were saying they usually wore camouflage and they had, what, a black beret?
Yes. On the outside, I saw them walking on the outside, and they had black berets. And the gentleman that actually would drive me to that location when I was being driven alone in the buggy, versus when we were actually walked one time with a larger group, but when we were driving in the buggy, the gentleman had it was a standard security officers.
Desert camouflage?
It was desert cami, yeah.
With a black beret, and then you said that when they would go inside the buildings, they would fold the beret and tuck it under one of the epaulets?
Under
on
the
shoulder?
epaulets, yes, upon the left shoulder.
Okay.
Now, the SEALs did the same thing at S4, except for you couldn't see it as well. I mean, these guys were all black there. But I would then be escorted into this one hangar, and there was a barrier. This is something that's never been spoken about before. There was a barrier inside where it artificially segregated off the hangar. I would check in there, sign my name on a log, and he would do the date and time in. The license plate would then be handed by the security officer who picked me up outside of the Janet flight to this security officer. He would say, okay, and then we would go walk down a short corridor, part of this artificial barrier, to the right-hand side, make a left through a doorway, and then the personnel, there were no security-looking personnel present, and there was an elevator there. We went down the elevator, I believe a couple floors. They were paranoid about floors, both at Groom and at S4. Absolutely paranoid about the numbers of the floors. The security officer who picked me up is the one that actually escorted me into the elevator.
Okay.
And they had the same motion every time. Both the SEALs did at S4 as well as the standard security, so I don't know, they may have been the same thing, but wearing different clothing. And what they would do is they would come into the elevator and they would tuck in. Now, the numbers on the outside of the elevator, there were no numbers.
Okay.
So I couldn't see a 1, 2, 3, 4 or anything like that.
Okay.
We would go into the elevator, which was just a shiny steel doors.
Would they actually just close like this, or were they bypass doors where there was one and then another?
No, they would just, as a normal elevator there.
Okay.
We had a different series of situations at S4, and we're going to get to the doorways there, because we actually had lift doors there.
Really?
Especially the ones in the decon between.
Like on the old warehouse?
Well, they were plexiglass. There were plexiglass, and there were air curtains on both sides of them.
Okay.
And so they would lift up out of the floor or drop down when you would move from one decon setting to another, from BL1 to BL2, for instance, as you were being further deconned and bunnied up.
Okay. Now, when you say air curtain, what is an air curtain?
Well, it was a projection, a lengthwise projection of air going upward, and the air curtain acts as an interference for the passing of particulates from one location to another.
Okay. Good.
And they were set up in the past level 2 positive pressure areas for levels 3 and 4 and 4-5. Ostensibly 4-5. I'm sure that they had something set up down in the ambassadorial suite, but I never got down in there to actually see it. I saw past the scissors a couple times, but that's it. So anyway, I was taken into the laboratory there several times under this same modality, and brought down a couple levels. But the thing about the behavior of the security officers was they would get in and they would put their back to the numbers, which were covered anyway. They had flat covers over the top of them, so there were no numbers. And they'd put their hands behind them, and ostensibly, I guess, count down and go pop, and they'd push a button, and down we would go.
So you never actually knew which floor you were on?
Nope, not initially. It was a few seconds, but depending upon the speed of the elevator, and it's difficult to judge when you're in an elevator, it was 2 or 3 floors down. I was brought into a standard laboratory environment, a microscopy environment, where there were microscopes sitting on a table. And the questioning by one personnel in there, usually wearing a blue lab coat, began. He would sit opposite me, and I joked with him. I said, I'm used to, when being tested, having a double-headed scope, and that was an actual reference to Jim Reynolds, because when he was teaching me originally at Long Beach Memorial, we had an AO double-headed scope.
Now, when you
and he
say
had a pointer.
double-headed, you mean where two people can view into
Binocular
the same...
double,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, a binocular double-headed. He would sit opposite me as you are now, but with a smaller length table. And I was tested a couple times under that scenario, where they would bring in a plastic slide box with numbers on the slides, and he'd say, go through them and tell me what you think.
Okay.
And at that point, another male attendant who was wearing a smock come up back at me and just wire me up with a standard headset.
Okay.
And I would begin viewing through the microscope, load the slides in myself, and
they would record your analysis?
everything, yes.
Okay.
That happened a few times with progressively more difficult slides. And then I would be transported back out buggied onto the jet. Then I would see people load in up in the front.
That was all that happened? You'd go all the way out there, do this little spiel with the microscope, and then you leave?
Yes.
Just that quick?
Yeah, well, 2-3 hours.
Still, that's a rather short stay, though, I guess.
It is. And my stay at Groom at any one time never got longer than that. Yeah, one time I was set out there in a bus for a couple hours maybe, and I don't know why they said, well, we need to hold, we need to wait. Maybe they had other personnel down at Papoose at the time, I don't know, where we couldn't come in and bump noses with them, so to speak.
So would it be safe to say that the highways that you traveled over, for the most part, were paved, at least as far as you could tell?
I'd say about halfway. They were paved. After that, we were on it's not as bad as trying to drive down to Lake Mojave or something down the Power Line Road along the west side of it, but it was bumpy.
Okay.
It was. I could hear that we were on dirt going in, and it stayed dirt until we popped up onto the tarmac, and then they said, okay, you can lift the blinds, and we lifted the blinds at that point and saw whatever we saw, and again, nothing that I saw in the way of weapon systems which were exposed, or aviation examples am I wishing to talk about. I have no, I'll go as far as to say some of the things that I saw up there had to have been experimental aircraft. But that's all. I don't have any authority to say anything else. And God knows if this is broadcast anywhere, everyone is going to end up hearing it. So will our enemies. So, what I saw, know nothing, see nothing.
So how did your work up there progress after that? I mean, were you at some point certified to continue working there and make analysis of tissue samples that were something other than human?
My last few times taken up into the Groom complex to the same location, I was brought into the back room, and in the back room they had an auto slide, what looked like I'm losing the word here, conveyor. And the slides were actually, they looked like rectangular solids. They were set up in a pressurized French type, like a Poissier type French cell. And they were brought in under an otoscope and actually rotated in on somebody else's command.
So these were not translucent slides where they had sliced through something and you were viewing light coming through tissue. You were looking at the hard surface of an opaque specimen from above? Or?
This was the particular microscope that I was working on was an invert scope. The head of the microscope, where the objectives were actually underneath the slide. So I was looking through a very fine barrier between the objective and the item on the inside of the pressurized slide.
Okay.
So it was actually an invert scope like you would use for tissue or culture.
Okay. Now, did they use that that optically clear oil so that the optics could get right up against the specimen, like you see occasionally in microscopy?
There was no oil applied on the invert scope. And in fact, we didn't get up over probably 600 diameters looking at these, and they looked like small microglial tissue, but they were not normal. They did not appear normal. They had a external and an internal division for the cytoplasmic process, which looked abnormal, and given the fact that it was dendritic in appearance and it was a tissue culture, I started wondering, and seriously, I had convinced myself at that moment I was looking at something for biowarfare. Because again, I wasn't thinking anything about anything being extraterrestrial. Everything was going to be prosaic to me, and that's the way I think first anyway.
Okay, well, let me stop you. Now, when you said that the tissue looked dendritic in nature, what does that, to the common person, what does that mean?
Well, it looked like a spider.
A spider.
It looked like a spider. It had a central soma, central nerve cell type body, and there were spider-like processes or filamentous type processes which extended out from the periphery of the soma.
Is this process you're describing, is this something that was true for tissues you would find on this planet?
Yes, sir.
Or is this something that you determined as a characteristic of whatever these tissues were from?
Yes, it's a characteristic function of all normal tissue culture cells, where they will behave differently depending upon what they will absorb upon. However, these cells would preferentially attach to the microbeads, but they would not, even if they were juxtaposed to one another, they would not attach to each other. So once they were separated in culture, ostensibly from their point of origin, from in vivo, and brought into an in vitro environment, they would no longer attach to one another. And that was one of the first characteristics, in fact, that was being brought out as I was looking at these. And they said, well, what are you looking for? I said, well, I'm looking for, if these are nerve cells, I'm looking for some sort of processes which would lead to a synapse, or processes which would lead to some sort of intercellular communication if they were brought from a tissue. If they were not just individually brought from separate sources.
Right.
I would be looking for some sort of desmosomal attachments or some sort of relationship between the cells. And it was if they were dancing with separate partners and they were refusing to acknowledge one another.
Okay. You thought this was somewhat unique then?
I did. What I thought immediately is that I was looking at either a chimeric cell produced through serial cloning and transfection.
Now, when you say chimeric, you're talking about perhaps the bonding of two unrelated species, that kind of thing?
Yes, or I was looking at a composite cell of some variety which was produced by infecting a cell of origin, we'll just say cell number 1, with a virus, and allowing, for instance, like infecting it with a retrovirus with reverse transcriptase and all of that. And then that was the expression of the virus within the cell during a pre-lytic phase. And that's what I thought when we were looking at it, and that's where my mind was going, because it was trying to divert back. I was trying to regress to the mean, so to speak, and divert back to the prosaic. However, when enough of these tissues were brought out over time, it wasn't making sense to me anymore that it was an act of biological engineering or some sort of a biowarfare experiment, because the cells were functioning normally in and of themselves. And yes, they were wanting to dance with separate partners and all of that, but
at some point you begin to realize that there was something odd here.
Well, yeah, and the thing is that the cells I was looking at, they were oddly sized. They appeared to be mammalian overall, the overall morphology, because I was then being told, okay, we're looking at skin cells, we're looking at brain cells, we're looking at parenchyma from a liver, but it wasn't normal. And I finally got to the point scratching my head saying, wait a minute here. This is not even veterinary histopathology or histology that I'm looking at here, or cytology preps. There's something very odd here that I'm looking at, and I began questioning and began questioning. Landed on one of the trips and deplaned. And I expected to see the buggy sitting there, but there was a white bus, this is a gray-white bus sitting there off to the left. He said, over there. I said, well, aren't we? No, over there. That's when I was taken down to Papoose for the first time.
Okay.
It was actually in the bus, and later on, years later, they were actually choppering us from there over to the location.
Okay.
We were being choppered. But got into this bus, and I was wondering, what the hell we were doing, because it took off in a different direction. And then they told us shades down, and so we actually helped in closing the shades in the bus. I could tell this was much more gravelly, and it almost felt like a couple times as the guy was driving, he was driving too fast, because I could feel the bus sliding. They are wild, some of them. They don't follow rules, and they play games. Well, this was my first introduction to it. So we slid along and got down there, and the security said, wait, wait, wait. The security wearing the cami never got off the bus. And they said, okay, guys, up and out, up and out. So came, looked around, and I noticed as soon as I got out onto the ground, there were two blue lines. Outside of the blue lines, they looked like somebody just did a spray painting. Okay. Later on, they actually had the lines in place, but this was it was poor. I mean, it looked bad. And then there were two red lines that were sprayed on the outside of it. He says, gentlemen, this is the security officer on the inside of the van. He says, you stay inside the blue lines. If you wander out of the red lines, he says, you see the red lines, both of you. So I want you to both acknowledge this. I said, yes, sir, I do. He says, if you wander outside those red lines, they will shoot you. Now I'm scared. I was extremely frightened at the moment. Shoot me. And he said, they will shoot you. Now I saw for the first time the security at Papoose. They were standing there with the small automatic weapons, staring at me and at him, but it felt like they were staring at me. It scared the hell out of me when I stepped off the bus.
I can imagine.
They were it wasn't just their presence, it was the way they were standing there. You can project presence, and of course I learned to do that as a police officer and all of that. But they were standing there with their weapons on you. I could tell that they were pointing their firearms at me. Mm-hmm. So we got off, and no bravado at this moment, and we followed our way up around to the right. It actually looped a little bit and around to the right to a door where one of the officers was standing at the door. He opened up this, there was no marking on this particular door whatsoever.
Just an inconspicuous door like you'd see in a theater or something?
It was actually inside of the mountain, but there was a roll around the door that I could tell was molding, but it was camouflage molding. Mm-hmm. And it was stuccoed, like spray painted, mm-hmm. so that it looked like sand. And it overhung over the door just enough where the door appeared like it was inset. Mm-hmm. So the door was opened up, we went inside. There's a table there with a security officer. We were asked to identify ourselves. We did. We signed our names. Okay. We were asked to put our social security numbers and date of birth on there as well. Photographs were taken of us at the time. Actual Polaroids were taken of us. So I probably looked like a scared rat there, but from there we were escorted in past what was called a hand scanner. We actually placed our hand on a scanner. I didn't see anything rolling over it, no light, no nothing like that. It was just a flat black screen. Mm-hmm. And they said, okay, fine. A door was then opened from the left to the right, and this is a sliding door from the left to the right, and we went through what appeared almost like an archway. And we were escorted around to the right immediately and down to a nurse's office. Well, we are getting into it here. Down to a nurse's office. There was a male nurse present. He asked us to strip down, which we did. When we stripped down, security, toting firearms, took our clothing away from us. Now that is a real queer feeling.
So you're buck naked at this point? Or are you
Yes, sir.
You're down to your skivvies?
No, he had us buck naked. Every time into the facility, you are stripped down to your birthday suit I was. There was never a time that I walked in with my clothing that I ever got by 2 guards with firearms in back of me, the male nurse in front of me, and went anywhere past that with my own clothing.
Now here's my next question. Did they weigh you coming and going?
I was getting there.
Okay.
We get weighed 3 or 4 times in this facility. There are weighing pans at the workstations down on level 4 where you have your private workstation. You are standing on a weighing sensor.
And this is to determine whether you're taking or pocketing anything that comes out of the facility.
Including anally.
Exactly right. Just like they would do in a federal penitentiary.
Yeah, there is no way to get anything out of there. Not a way on God's green creation. They've got cameras. When you walk in, there are ball cameras. Not that different from casinos.
Exactly.
It's watching every move you make. There are ball cameras in the restrooms. You can't do anything without being watched in this facility. Nothing. You're not in there not to be watched. You're in there to get a job done. And that's the way the drive was in there. It was, you're here to do the best job that's possible for any human being, get it done. That's just the way we were treated. And that was initially until things calmed down when J1 came in a couple times and arms went around and I got treated like the favorite son, but still.
Now J1, what does that mean?
He is the official honorary first position leader of the MJ-12.
Okay, and they call him J1?
Yeah, it's the number 1 position.
Now, is this J1 person someone that the average public individual would recognize?
No. This particular gentleman was on the television a couple times, only a couple times to my knowledge, and it was during the first Gulf War.
J1 is Vice Admiral J.M. McConnell, Director of the National Security Agency, 1992 to 1996. Admiral McConnell has been like Dan's godfather throughout his entire career. Over 40 microbiologists have died strange deaths over the last 5 years. The fact that Dan is still alive is a testament to McConnell's power to control Dan's life. Stargate Productions has been ordered by Admiral McConnell to complete this video biography as soon as possible. That task has been completed as you are witnessing.
From NBC News in Washington, this is Meet the Press with Tim Russert.
Our issues this Sunday: what is the real terrorist threat to the United States homeland? How good is our intelligence gathering? And nearly 6 years after September 11th, why is Osama bin Laden still at large? With us, the Director of National Intelligence, Admiral Mike McConnell, in his first television interview. This document, the National Intelligence Estimate, entitled The Terrorist Threat to the U.S. Homeland, was released. How serious is this threat, and what can we do about it? Joining us for an exclusive interview is the Director of National Intelligence, Admiral Mike McConnell. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let me show you a key judgment from this report. Quote, we judge the U.S. homeland will face a persistent and evolving terrorist threat over the next 3 years. In layman's language, for the American viewers watching today, what is the most serious threat facing our country?
Tim, the most serious threat is that the plotters that are being observed will be successful in penetrating our defenses and conducting an attack that would result in mass casualties. Their intent is to effect an attack with mass casualties. A secondary attack.
Dr. Dan Burisch's mentor during his whole life has been Admiral J. Mike McConnell. During McConnell's interview with Brussert in 2007, Dan was being debriefed by Stargate Productions. Admiral McConnell, as head of national security for President Bush, as well as being in charge of the Majestic 12 organization, has the power to protect his, in effect, godson, Dr. Burisch. Admiral McConnell is the moral compass of the Majestic 12 organization. He appointed Dr. Burisch the esteemed position as representative number 9 in that august group in the spring of 2005. Dr. Burisch recommended that the group take a vote for or against disclosure in the light of the treaties that had been signed by the off-worlders. As of April 2005, the vote was 6-5 for disclosure. There is always one abstention from voting because of the organization's adherence to Scottish Rite protocols. In September 2005, a second vote was taken. The vote was 8-3 for disclosure. When these votes are taken, they are never reversed. Dan was uncomfortable with MJ-12 organization's protocols. Therefore, Admiral McConnell allowed him to resign and appoint his successor. If UFO researchers and the lay public will politely inquire of Admiral McConnell as to the truthfulness of these statements, Stargate Productions is confident Admiral McConnell will answer in the affirmative.
We're watching them train and recruit, and their effort is to put someone inside the United States. There have been some clues and some cases where...
You've not only been told that if you step outside the red lines, you'll be shot. You've been asked to completely disrobe. You're being followed everywhere you go by cameras and by armed guards. So, did they expect you to do your work in the nude, or did they take you to a place where you would go to a locker room, get dressed, that kind of thing?
No. We were initially weighed in there on an inset pan that was inset into the floor, and it was on the left side of the nurse's desk. I saw no monitors up in front of me, no indication of my weight, nothing. And the nurse said, "Okay, fine, thank you." The weighing sensors don't go to the nurse's office. The weighing sensors go to the communications area.
Okay.
The surveillance area where everything was being watched.
Okay.
How many people worked in there? No clue. Never saw in there, but I saw it labeled when I was down the hall. So I know it was there, and it was a fairly big facility, and I heard a lot of machine noise going on in there, a lot of hustling and bustling. I could actually, it's very poor for soundproofing in the facility. There's a lot of echoes, and there is a lot of, until you get all the way down to 4, a lot of echoes, and there's a lot of where you can hear between walls. The acoustics are very poor. So I weighed, got off. Over on a bench on the right-hand side, they had a nice little jumpsuit for me to get into. Got into the jumpsuit, no underwear, and that is what I had on. Walked down the hall barefoot, and around the corner, we were escorted around the corner to the right, got into the restroom, and they had booties for us to wear. From there...
Put right over your bare feet?
Yep. From there, I was escorted over to the briefing room, and initially, it was just right, almost like right across the hall. It was a little catty corner.
Right.
And initially, they put a few books down, and we started working with what seemed to me to be this childish histology. And at that point, it was being termed childish histology crap because I was getting tired of looking at the same stuff. The next time into the facility, now that was like for 2 hours. We went through these briefing books, and it was almost a fill-in-the-blank test sort of situation. The next time into the facility, we were brought into the briefing room. We had to go through the whole thing.
Again.
Weighing, property was handed out. The property gets handed back in the nurse's office when we're getting ready to leave, not in security.
When you say property, you mean the things you were wearing when you first arrived?
Right, my keys in my pocket, you know, that sort of thing.
Right.
And however, when we got our property back, the change, keys, whatever we had with us at the time. And gradually we learned just don't carry anything, just nothing, not even your personal ID. Excuse me, they'll know you. They already had apparently my fingerprints to get in there anyway. Okay. And my fingerprints are in an FBI record anyway, because when I was being tested for, not only for the seminary, I had to be actually, a background test was done.
Permanent background check.
Right?
Yeah.
But also for the Department of Parole and Probation. When our property was handed back to us, it was neatly folded in a bag. It was like a little white pouch bag. But there was also a clear plastic baggie, like a prison system, where everything else was in our watches. We were allowed to keep our glasses on initially. After I was read into the Aquarius program, my personal glasses were removed. And when I would come down to decon on level 4, they would give me a new set of glasses to wear, which were my prescription.
Okay.
And ultimately, when they did the bell, when we were going in for the JRod, the front of the bell was beveled, and my prescription was actually beveled into the front where I could see clearly out of the front of this bell.
Wow.
However, the bell fit over an apparatus. It almost looked like a ring apparatus. So the bell would sit over the top of it and actually rest on it around the sides. Mm-hmm. This ring apparatus and suit did not fit me appropriately, and they had only so many of them in there on level 4 decon and gowning. So, well, the 4 or 5 to go into the clean sphere. So the problem was either one was too big, which I could not wear, or there was one which was slightly too small, so the bell fit on too tight and was extremely painful. I was dressed each time. Okay. I didn't dress myself when I was down there.
So you had people that would assist you with this?
Yeah, there were 2 gentlemen that would actually suit me up.
Okay.
And do the pressure checks, communication checks.
Okay.
And there was fit testing that was done down there where they did I think it was isoamyl acetate, where I was actually brought in each time under a bell, under almost like a trash can, large drum, and I had to stand there each time when I was actually gowned up in the white suit, the TES, and I would have to breathe and indicate whether or not I was perceiving any odors. And there was isoamyl acetate used, and there was an irritant used, and then once I did not perceive any odors, then I was washed. I was put over a grill and actually showered off and washed, and then from there, I'm getting out of sequence here because I had to go through a medical check first, and I was cathetered and plugged and the whole thing.
Okay.
But anyway, back over to Papoose coming out. They'd give us our property, and we would be led back out to the BSS 1 room, which was back out around to the left, back to the main security room. We would sign out and be taken from there out to the bus and be transported back and then flown back to Vegas. Okay. When we started actually doing biological work, we were walked in our jumpsuits up the hall, a right-hand turn, all the way down the hall, and on to the left was the elevator system. There were guards in the hallway, a few, I'll just put it that way, and that includes in front of the elevator room area. And again, I'm not going to give precise locations where they stand because it's bad enough. I'm giving the schematics for the place. I haven't been told not to.
What was the significance of the positioning of the guards?
Well, there was nowhere you could stand in the facility where there was not a guard with an eye on you.
Okay, well that makes
so
sense.
The physical security was such that there was the surveillance, of course, security. The physical security was
line of sight at all
oppressive.
times.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, there was a lot of FaceTime with the physical security.
Sure.
We would be walked to the elevator. The guard which would go with you in the elevator would step in and play the routine.
Hit the buttons from behind,
Right.
so you never knew what floor you were going to. at
Now,
least initially.
Initially, this is things changed as we got an ID badge. Initially, we had our ID badges. Dodie actually saw my ID badge years ago. We actually had the striped badges, which were extremely close to what I saw was our report. The DXWX on the bottom for Department of Engineering Transfer was on my badge when I was issued a badge. And I had an H number, which was an interdepartmental moving number. It basically meant I could go from floor to floor, that I would be responsible on more than one floor. And that was basically initially for 4, 5, and for 3 above it in the culture and the animal facility, and where the people were housed in a little biomedical unit.
So now these guards that would follow you as you went from one place to another, did they have kind of a routing schedule for you that would show them where you were actually supposed to be going?
No, they knew. They never had anything in their hands like a schedule or anything like that.
Okay.
They knew exactly where we were supposed to be taken. So I could tell that these gentlemen were briefed prior to being escorted.
Okay.
They knew exactly what to do, and they were extremely professional in doing it. Here's the way it went. This is now the first time down on the level 4. We were dropped down to level 4. I know that it's level 4 now. I didn't then.
Okay.
And we would come out an elevator. It's a real cute trick that they do with elevators. We would get out, and there would be an attendant standing there wearing an all-white smock. And it was a sort of a closure smock around the neck. During the days where I had my ID, I would still have my ID on me on my white gown. Now, mind you, we're shuffling down this hallway before we get into the elevator, and there are other personnel coming out, such as Robert would have been coming out from a bay to a lab out through that hallway, so we felt kind of, like guinea pigs all the time when we went in there. But he would be standing there down on level 4. And he would take from us, when we had our badge. Before then, he didn't. He just escorted us around to the right to decon. We would de-gown again, everything would come off, and then we were given socks for the first time. And everything was white initially that we had. We would be sprayed off. We would be coated, actually physically coated with a spray. And we had eye cups and all of that we would put on.
Okay.
They would physically coat us with a spray.
Was it an antiseptic of some
Yes.
kind?
It wasn't betadine, thank God.
He'd look like one of those early...
yes, the early suntans.
Yeah, the early dye version of suntan. Yeah.
Well, see, the thing is, when they put the eye cups on us, I didn't know what it was. It was not cold. It was comfortable. And they sprayed us completely down. And I started laughing one time in there, and I was joking. We weren't supposed to talk. We were supposed to keep our mouths shut. And I said, you're not painting me blue or nothing. And the attendant down there started laughing, which was the first real humanity that I saw out of anybody in this facility.
Recognize this common bound.
Chris knows it's not in control. They know that this is a wild train out of control. And they want that control back. They're not stupid. They know that there are things that are going on down the hall from them that they can't fathom. They deserve to have that back in their hands because that's what they were elected to do. and if we care at all about what's left of our Constitution, they deserve to have that in their hands. Aren't we the masters of our destiny in our country? Aren't we supposed to be? Yes, sir. Supposed to be.
Dan Burisch, microbiologist, is debriefed by Mark McCandlish regarding Burisch's activities at Area 51. There he administered medical procedures to the complex.
And he says, no. He says, we're not coloring you or nothing. It was clear. It was clear. From there, we were washed, actually washed over our heads with a hand sort of a spray, and told to go ahead and to gown up. And there was another white smock. It was a separate one, different one, all clean, on a hanger on the right hand side.
So, I mean, if you were sprayed off, did they have towels and you dry off, or it was just you jump into the jumpsuit wet?
No, this evaporated extremely quickly.
Oh.
And we weren't warm air dried or anything like that. Like you get the decon down the hall, they actually have blowers down there. This thing, whatever the mist was, whatever the antiseptic was, and I was never told what the chemical composition was, it evaporated very quickly. There may have been some sort of a light alcohol involved or something. I don't know. But we would be first deconned that way, and then we went around the corner. Now, as we would go around the corner, our badges, this is for later on, as we got our badges would already be on a hook, on a small board, like a 12 by 12 badge board, and it would be in a clear plastic encasement, kind of almost like a lamination. Mm-hmm. But it would be just kind of popped down into this little pouch, and then next to it there were a series of numbers with blue badges, and we would be told to take a number. And so I would pick favorite numbers in between. You know, I would grab a 4 whenever I could or whatever, because that's always been my favorite number. And we would pick them off and put them on our smock, and then we would go immediately around to the right to the briefing room. That is where we got our first indication, true, honest-to-God indication that we were dealing with something extraterrestrial. The King Tut container was opened up, the King group. It's called a King Group training update tapes. The cabinet was open and we were given manuals to study, and we knew at that point that we were dealing with something that was ET, and that was more than sobering.
I can imagine. Well, I mean, was there any kind of preview to this introduction to the fact that you were going to be dealing with an extraterrestrial?
Sam, Little John, Sam H. He's a colonel in the United States Air Force, or so I've been told. He wears the right uniform. But anyway, he tacitly acknowledged that this was something off-world one time prior to being in there, but that's the only indication. That's the only indication, because I said, this looked like something alien. He looked over and he went to me, and that scared me a little bit, but at the same time I thought he was bullshitting me too.
Sure, okay.
And I still thought, until the briefing book was put down in front of me, and these blue briefing books said DTIC on them, in white bold letters.
The Defense Technical Intelligence Center?
As I understand now. Years ago, I didn't even know what it meant.
Now, was this like a 3-ring binder?
Yes.
Or was it a fully bound,
yes.
hardbound book?
No. This was a 3-ring binder.
Okay.
And it had sections in it, actual tabbed off sections. And we were directed at different times, a couple different times in. We were actually brought into that level just for the purpose of going to the briefing room.
Now, did these blue books, do they have a title? I mean, a title page?
Inside, yes.
And what kind of titles would you expect to see?
There was one word at the top of the page, and that was Aquarius.
Aquarius.
And I kind of joked about it because my birth sign is Aquarius. I said, "Oh, this must be mine." I said, "Do you have a Leo?" You know,
Right. Okay.
You know, there was
sign,
yeah, there was some joking going on, and but it said Aquarius on it. There was a bunch of scope orders and you know, fiddle faddle on there about defense institutions, and I just didn't give a damn about it.
Was there any kind of introduction that said, well, you know, the species that you will be dealing with is from such and such a star system?
Well, yes, it said that. Yes, it said that, but it didn't say it that way. It was more technical manual. They were reports done in what we called OIF, open interrogatory format. And that's one of the problems with the Q94 doc, is that it's not done in the standard introduction or an abstract, an actual intro, a materials and methods. It's not written that way because we were never asked to express ourselves that way. We were asked to express ourselves as a thought stream, which is why that method, I guess, was applied, so that there would be an open communication of information back and forth, and that the personnel in the laboratories who would be writing the reports for the cover committee, I found out later on, the cover committee would then take out of our reports what they wanted, file a report that we would never see, and that report would go up to the 12 or up to the 33 before the 33 were defunct. And so we were never pressed to write it in that type of a format, and the express reason given was it would take you too long. We want results, 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 results. So just talk and write in your reports, and then we'll take from it
what
we need to get our job done, to get the mission completed. Okay. So they were written in that sort of a fashion. They were technical, but they were written in that sort of a fashion, and it made it a little bit difficult to understand, even while, I'm admitting to it, it was difficult to understand while we were initially reading it, what we were dealing with. However, it became extremely well known once we ran into the term extraterrestrial biological entity.
Okay, so this EBE term is not just something that's been tossed out in science fiction and various movie formats. This is an actual term that's used by the military?
Yes. Yes. I had no idea for the longest time that I was dealing with something that was on a different timeline. I thought that it was a true alien. This thing was an extraterrestrial, but it wasn't an alien. This thing, the person.
An extraterrestrial, but not an alien.
That's right.
Be more specific.
Okay. Evolutionary lineage. His evolutionary lineage, Kiela's, was directly related to our own. He's a human being, yet a changed human being. When I use the term alien, I'm meaning specifically something of an extraterrestrial nature which has no genetic lineage to humanity. So when you won't hear me say I met with an alien. In fact, I'll say that I didn't meet with an alien, I met with an extraterrestrial. And I've mentioned that before. That's the difference. We're not talking about an evolutionary pathway here resulting from a human being if we're talking about an alien. If I'm just talking about an extraterrestrial human, I'm talking about a JRod or one of the Orion beings who actually have a genetic lineage to the human race.
Really?
Yes.
So,
and of course I didn't know that at the time when I was initially reading these books.
So this actually sounds an awful lot like some of the things that we've heard about the Egyptians believing that they had gods or ancestors or something in the Orion constellation.
Yeah, except for the thing was that they weren't their ancestors. They were their future. During the occasion that you drew, when Kiela actually stepped up onto me, He didn't knock me over. He couldn't knock me over. I fell over on my back. He began walking toward me across the clean sphere, and it broke the protocol that I expected, even though I felt kinship with him at the time already. It broke the protocol that I expected to happen, and I stepped back in fear away from him. When I stepped back rapidly, there's a grating on the floor in the clean sphere.
Right.
My shoe, I don't remember if it was my right or my left, but my shoe was caught in the grating briefly, and it caused it to stub my heel a little bit, and I actually fell over backward onto my back in there. And he walked half smiling, trying to smile, up onto me and sat on my chest and looked at me. All hell started breaking loose. I heard over the microphone at the time, both from the gallery. The number 2 broke in then because we had 2 separate communication pathways in there. We had number 1, which covered the assisting team, the B team on the floor around the clean sphere, and we had a number 2 unit that we could push, which would go directly to the security surveillance. And gradually we got to know, although we never saw their faces in the surveillance area, we got to know their voices.
Right, okay.
So I heard everything, all hell breaking loose on the floor. Never saw it because at that time I was already falling into his eyes. And that's exactly what it felt like. Mm-hmm. It felt like although I was lying on my back, I was falling into him.
Mm-hmm. Now, was this something that you had ever been warned about in terms of your face-to-face experience with the individual to look out for and to avoid?
No. The protocol was that he would remain put. From our aspect, when we would enter in, he would be directly across from the gantry, the entry port, where we had an actual slide drum where we would hose off, connect. Well, actually we would connect, then we would hose on and then hose off to get the sequence right so that the airflow continued properly. And there was a drum that moved in the gantry way that actually fit into the side of the clean sphere's gantry, so that it could be locked off and we could step in through the pressure.
Now, did your umbilical and all your feed lines and everything, did it come right out of the rotating drum?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
So that is the umbilical for the internal atmosphere for the TES, not the umbilical for the samples that we took. They came out of a separate port on the side of the clean sphere that went from there and then basically straight up. And that went up into a culture area up in level 3. It went beyond the level 4's step up where the biological containment facilities were, from BL1 to the 3+ lab that we had. They called it BL4 down at the end, but that's supposed to be, although it was a hose in from the ceiling where we would walk. We used to joke between us when we were in there. The one joke we would make, we'd say, we're a hydra. We felt like a hydra in there moving around. There was only supposed to be 2 of us, but sometimes it got up to 4. And a biological containment facility that is designated as a BL4, having to do with infectious diseases for which there are no presumptive treatments, they are supposed to be in a separate facility altogether, separated from the lower biological containment levels. Well, this thing was not. Yes, it was a cabinet lab. We dealt strictly inside of cabinets with glove boxes, but it was still attached to the 3 next to it, to the 2 and to the 1. So they were contiguous. So it was called for, and there was an actual sign above the door around the back. I've got it drawn on there where it's located, where we would move from the decon processing in from 3 to 4 that said pretend above the door. In other words, pretend you're walking into a level 4.
Dan Burisch is debriefed regarding his early university education at SUNY. In the debriefing, he goes into great depth regarding the scientific procedures employed to remedy the extraterrestrials malady called peripheral neuropathy. Also, Dan describes in great detail the protocols that were in place for navigating the biocontainment area in Area 51S4 at Papoose Mountain, 10 miles south of Groom Lake proper. He also mentions Bob Lazar's participation in the same facility where Dan worked for over 10 years. In order to give the audience a point of reference of what a biocontainment facility is like, he refers to several popular movies. The main one is Dustin Hoffman's excellent portrayal of a biowarfare expert in the movie Outbreak. Therefore, we are showing these clips with the acknowledgement of Warner Brothers Home Video.
To the full floor down from here, where we would go to the decon and then around the corner to the left. It would come down. Let me take you here. From here, it would go down a half floor to this location. And you could either walk here, and most of the time we were not allowed up the stairs to the gallery that overlooked the clean sphere, and there were two boardrooms which were up the stairs that could be accessed, and they had television sets sent into the boardroom table so that they could watch if they wanted to be sitting down and not actually observing directly over the clean sphere. They could sit in here and watch. But we would make a right-hand turn and come down, and we would do our decon. There were supplies in a medical unit. We'd have to come in here and be catheterized, then be deconned and gowned, and then we would come in around the right-hand side here to where the clean sphere would be lifted up out of the ambassador suite. When I first saw the JRod, I was up here upstairs in the gallery, and I was standing in one of three large bay windows, I believe in the center, my best recollection. He was over here on the left, which is where he was told to be before this would ever be lifted up. So when I actually came in over here, I was like almost direct opposite of him. So when he walked toward me from this aspect, that's why it freaked me out, because he was not supposed to approach anywhere else in there. We were supposed to approach him only, in this after a very complicated series of Sigma identification protocols, which became a joke between him and myself. But when I first saw him, he was sitting over here. He had difficulty walking, difficulty standing up, so he was hunched down next to the actual crystal glass, which was there. Whatever it was made out of, some sort of a composite.
Was it a one-piece sphere? Or
it sure looked like one
you
piece.
See, like, triangular?
No. It was clear. It was clear. It was totally clear, totally translucent, and it looked like a single piece. A sphere's hemisphere.
So there'd be just a dome. There wasn't any bottom part to the sphere.
All I saw was the grating on the floor, and there was hash grating on the floor. But the hash grating was probably a good 4 centimeters apart, and it was enough where if you didn't walk right, that's why I tripped.
Okay.
And so he was hunched over in the corner. And when he was hunched, his head was down, his arms were protruding forward and down, and he literally took on the aspect of a praying mantis or type of an insect sitting there. And I've found out, of course, during the consequence of work with him, that he was bearing a cocaine type syndrome, which actually caused his overall body shape to protrude out praying mantis-like. We were basically warned that if something went wrong in there, that we were to be cognizant of the fact that it may take some substantial time before anybody could come in and get me out, or to get any of the, Stephen went in as well. So we knew that if something went wrong,
you could be in trouble.
We could be in trouble. We could die. And that was something that we just accepted for the privilege of doing the work.
Now, was the atmosphere in there outside the clean suit, was it hazardous to you?
Yes.
Was it what, mostly nitrogen?
It was mostly nitrogen. It had a great deal of oxygen, just like our atmosphere, but it had a higher hydrogen partial pressure. I don't believe that the hydrogen partial pressure went over about 4%. And that's what he felt comfortable in. And that's the one thing that there was a substantive increase in pressure inside the clean sphere from normal atmospheric pressure, but it wasn't all that much different from STP, what we would call STP. So if he would be reduced and decompressed quickly, he would become damaged. But he was set specifically in a hyperbaric environment, partially for his normal atmosphere and partially to decrease the onset and the progression of the disease. Which means that before he was as ill as what he was, he could have been brought out for short periods of time into our normal environment. And that's what, you know, a lot of the folks that have only heard part of the story are screaming, well, wait a minute. What do you mean he you know, was just in that clean sphere? Well, I never got a chance to tell them that, you know, the actual facts of it. These are the actual facts of it. He could have. Now, by the time that I met him, he could not have. If he would have been brought out under STP, he would have died. No doubt.
Now, when you say STP, you mean standard
Temperature pressure.
Okay.
Right. When I was pulled into him, that's exactly what it felt like. It's like I fell into his eyes. I began seeing, I began feeling what he was seeing and what he was feeling inside. Like I was separate, I still knew that I was me, but I could feel it as an omnipresence in me. And it was rushing in waves coming at me. It was not contiguous either. It was rushing in waves, so I actually felt the pulse of his talking to me, of his communication with me. And if he burped, which he did frequently, I could actually feel that. And he would often vomit, and it would run down the side of his face, and I'd have to clean him up. He was extremely ill. But when I fell into him, one of the things that he showed several things contiguously as the waves were going, you know, in process, almost like a movie, a set of trailers for a movie. Was an extremely jungle-like, heavy humidity presence, hot area, lush, tropical. I saw something that looked like him, a JRod, if you will, standing on a block, and the JRod was wearing an urias.
An urias? Oh, like a pharaoh.
He was dressed like a pharaoh.
Really?
And the name, people were chanting. They didn't look like slaves to me, they looked like willing participants.
Were they the same species? Same
No, we're talking humans here.
Oh.
We're standing, other human, well, I mean, he's a human too, but I mean, present day, present reality type humans of that era. He was standing there, he had a staff, almost like a crozier staff, except for there was only a ring on top of it. And he was talking physically, and he was barking out, he looked like he was barking out orders. Very, very guttural, very, And they were chanting one name, Ra. They were saying Ra, Ra, Ra. And I was in this, seeing this through his eyes or his memory. And I saw what looked like a beautiful alabaster sheen face of something which was inclined. I saw two large rails, and I saw light discs. Every time they would chant Ra, Ra, it would light up. And they looked like swirling sort of a vortex, but I didn't see it feed downward. It just looked like a disc, like an accretion disc that you'd see for the development of the solar system, right? And I saw these blocks being passed with their chants up these discs. They were going almost effortlessly. They were being touched with the hands of the people who were there, who were all wearing what they almost looked like priests. And there were hundreds of them that were walking up inclined stairs that looked like they had just been poorly done on the side of these rails. They were huge concrete looking type blocks. And they were going rah, rah. And they were pushing their hands, and I saw these blocks carrying up, and I realized what it was that they were building. That told me that either the ETs that time, and I was only able to analyze this later because it was one experience after another, and it left me nearly comatose because I didn't know that he was on a different timeline, a traveler. That either the extraterrestrials were involved with us throughout our history, or they were involved with us throughout our history and they were from another time.
From our future.
Right.